Southern Fried True Crime covers cases that are not suitable for young listeners, and there may also be some explicit language used. Listener discretion is advised. You know the old saying that poison is a woman's weapon? That comes from Sherlock Holmes, and so, being fiction, it's often scoffed at. Over the past few years, I've seen that debunked in some actual statistics. But that's because men commit 90% of the murders. So if 9 out of 10 murderers are men, naturally they use more poison than women. I read an interesting Washington Post article when I looked up these stats yet again. Using FBI studies to break this down, journalist Dan Keating explained that you have to remove several factors. First and foremost, separate the statistics of men and women. Because, for instance, guns are the most popular weapon for both. But per Keating, quote, "With all guns removed, women are almost 4 times as likely as men to use poison. It is used just over 1% of killings by men and just over 4% of killings by women." I could keep throwing statistics at you, but Arthur Conan Doyle was right when he wrote that poison is a woman's weapon. And there are all kinds of theories as to why. The one that makes the most sense to me is that poison is much more likely to be used in killings in which the murderer knows the victim. It's personal, and it's sneaky, less messy, and even elegant, as Keating proposes. I don't cover serial killers often, but I have covered several female killers, and they are almost always poisoners. Known as Black Widows, of course, because that sounds sexier than serial killer. And their victims are family, from their husbands and children to their in-laws. So we know poison is indeed a woman's weapon, and we know who she's most likely to kill. But, as always, it's the why that I find most interesting. Welcome to episode 195, Serial Killer, Judi Beunoano. In 1980, Dr. Michael Berry was a U.S. Army physician with the Walter Reed Army Hospital in Washington, D.C. And in January of that year, he met his new patient, 18-year-old Michael, known as Mike Goodyear. Mike was originally from Florida, and he had enlisted in the Army only 7 months before, in June of 1979. And back in June, Mike had appeared to be a strong, healthy young man. He had to be, or else the Army wouldn't have taken him. Now something was wrong with Mike, but Dr. Berry couldn't be 100% sure what, or why, or even how. In October of 1979, Mike became inexplicably sick. He was vomiting, having diarrhea, and getting really dizzy. By November, Mike was dealing with an awful rash, more vertigo, and persistent tingling in his fingers and toes. The very next month in December, his lower extremities were paralyzed. He couldn't move from his elbows to his fingers or from his knees to his toes. He was discharged from the Army as a private less than a year after enlisting. And from January to April of 1980, he stayed at the Walter Reed Army Hospital in D.C. There, Dr. Berry determined that Mike had developed a nerve disease, one that had killed many of the nerves in his arms and legs. And while Mike showed some progress during his time at Walter Reed, the diagnosis was grim. In Dr. Berry's medical opinion, Mike wasn't going to regain the full use of his arms or legs ever again. The Pensacola News-Journal reported that Dr. Berry said he might have improved slightly, but the best we hoped for was that he would be able to wash himself, attend to his toilet needs, and feed himself. This must have been so frightening for Mike. Somehow, with no warning and little explanation, he had gone from fully able to disabled in the blink of an eye. When he left the Walter Reed Army Hospital, he could walk no more than 15 feet. And he had to do so with the help of special metal leg braces. According to courtroom testimony and the Pensacola News-Journal, some people did have a few theories as to why Mike experienced this paralysis. One was that on October 17th of 1979, Mike was stationed at Fort Leonard Wood, Montana. While there, he was exposed to chlorine gas, but medical experts later determined that Mike's chlorine gas exposure could not have caused his paralysis. Another theory for Mike's unexpected paralysis was a special condition Mike had. It was called pica. The Cleveland Clinic stated that pica is an eating disorder where a person compulsively eats things that are not food. Usually, it's harmless and can be treated with therapy. But Mike was navigating pica eating back in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, decades before mental health support and therapy became mainstream. As a child, Mike had been known to eat pencils, and according to his mother, he had once eaten paint from a house built in 1909. Before the 80s, there was a chance that both of these items, the pencils and the paint, contained lead, which, as you most certainly know, is a highly toxic metal that you really should not eat. So maybe this was the reason for Mike's unexpected nerve disease. But back in 1980, no one could say with 100% certainty, not even Dr. Berry. In April of 1980, Dr. Berry met with Mike, and they talked about his upcoming return to Gulf Breeze, Florida, where his family lived. He was going to stay with his mother, 36-year-old Judi, and his brother, 14-year-old James, and sister, 13-year-old Kimberly. He told Dr. Berry that he was looking forward to a boat ride on the water. His family was going canoeing to celebrate his return and ongoing recovery. But Dr. Berry stopped Mike in his tracks. He told him that unless strict precautions were taken, he shouldn't get into the water. It would be horribly unsafe, since there was simply no way Mike could swim. In Dr. Berry's court testimony, he explained, "I told him if he turned over, he would probably drown unless he was protected with a life-saving device." So imagine Dr. Berry's surprise when, only 1 month later, he learned that Mike had died. He had been in a canoe with his mother Judi and younger brother James, and the canoe had tipped over. So on May 13, 1980, 19-year-old Mike drowned. A rescue squad recovered his body about a half a mile downstream. They found that Mike had been weighed down by about 12 pounds of leg braces, and he had not been wearing a life jacket. At the time, Mike's death seemed cut and dry. It was a tragic accident, yes, but easily explained. People make risky decisions all the time that lead to their untimely deaths. And this was no different, right? Well, this is a true crime podcast, and so you've probably already deduced that Mike's situation was, in fact, quite different. Mike's mother, Judi, and his little brother, James, had strapped Mike into a lawn chair in the center of the canoe. Setting aside the safety implications of that decision, Mike's metal braces would have been locked into a sitting position. After all, he was supposedly sitting in that lawn chair. So why was Mike's body recovered with the braces locked in a standing position, as if his legs were stuck straight out? And if the canoe had capsized near the riverbank where Judi and James told everyone it had, why were Mike's sunglasses found floating in the center of the 70-foot wide river? And what exactly had happened on that canoe? First, Judi and James told everyone that Mike had cast a fishing line that had gotten caught in a tree branch. The branch fell, and it, along with a startled snake relaxing on the branch, landed in their boat. In the panic, the canoe tipped over. But later, Judi and James began telling people that they had hit a submerged tree stump. And later after that, they clarified, Mike had cast a fishing line, the tree branch fell, and there was a snake on the branch, but they also hit a submerged tree stump. Judi and James were adamant that this was the series of unfortunate events that led to Mike's death. It sounded crazy, but that's life. Crazy things happen. Investigators had to ask one very important question. How could Mike, paralyzed from the elbow to the fingertips, cast a fishing line? Someone was lying, but who and why? Mike's mother, Judi Beunoano, had several name changes, which is confusing, so we're going to use all of her names chronologically in telling her story. She was born Anna Lou Welty in April of 1943 to parents Jesse and Mary Lou in Quanah, Texas. And before we begin really diving into the life of Anna Lou Welty, I need you to know an important caveat. There is a lot of misinformation about Anna circulating around the internet as if it is fact. Books have been authored and documentaries have been filmed with blatantly incorrect information. It's actually a little crazy. But I guess it goes to show that if one person publishes a falsehood, others will repeat it. For today's episode, I have done my damnedest to ensure every piece of information about Anna and her family is correct. For the most part, I've used court documents, newspaper articles, and direct accounts from people involved to ensure that this is the most accurate information possible. But honestly, it's challenging to know if everything is 100% definitely, absolutely right, especially when people who call themselves experts on Anna's life have actually gotten things really, really wrong. Obviously, I didn't use those people as sources, but still, grant me some grace, please. And to help, I'm going to call out information that is heavily disputed as it comes up. Mostly it's about Anna's childhood, which was not as well documented as her adulthood. After that, things become pretty clear. So here's the first moment of some of that heavily disputed information, and that is Anna Lou Welty's name at the time she was born. Over the course of her life, Anna Lou would proceed to go by at least 6 names. But due to her many name changes, quite frankly, people have lost track of Anna's original name. Many have reported that the name on her birth certificate was Judias Anna Lou Welty, but I don't think that's right. And that's because Pensacola News-Journal reporter Dave Goodwin wrote the following on May 13th of 1984. Anna Lou Welty, born on April 4th, 1943, in the flat prairie wheat country of Quanah, Texas, near the Oklahoma border, according to her birth certificate in the Hardeman County Courthouse. So yeah, I'm going with Dave here, and we'll talk about how Anna became Judias in just a moment. So here we have Anna, daughter of Jesse and Mary Lou. Growing up, Anna had 3 brothers. And since her parents were married in 1928 and she wasn't born until 1943, I imagine she was one of the youngest of the 4 Welty children. Anna's relatives remembered that as a young girl, she was smart and sweet. According to the San Angelo Weekly Standard newspaper, on February 20th of 1947, Anna's mother, 34-year-old Mary Lou Welty, died in San Angelo, Texas. We're not sure how Mary Lou died, but it seemed unexpected. 34 is so young. According to her obituary, Mary Lou had been receiving medical care at a sanatorium prior to her death. So I imagine her death was a shock to her family, and especially to 3-year-old Anna. Following the death of her mother, Anna's family members recalled that she had a tough childhood. According to relatives who spoke with the Pensacola News-Journal, Anna's father, Jesse, was often absent. He would get his paycheck, leave until it was spent, and return when he needed more money. At some point, Anna's father, Jesse, remarried, this time to a woman named Jean, and they lived in Roswell, New Mexico with Jean's 2 sons from a previous marriage. And around 1957, a teenaged Anna lived with her dad, stepmother, and stepbrothers. There are allegations that Anna's father, stepmother, and stepbrothers treated her horribly. Some people believed that Anna was forced to serve them like a slave, but I couldn't verify that information through enough primary sources, court documents, or newspaper articles. Rumor has it that Anna retaliated against this child abuse by attacking her stepmother and her stepbrothers. And in response to that, Anna was forced to attend a juvenile detention center in Albuquerque. And this part is true. She did go to a juvenile detention center named Foothills High School. Her relatives remembered that she went there for about a year before running away when she was about 15 years old. It's unclear if Anna ever graduated high school, but some accounts suggest that she did. On March 30th of 1961, 17-year-old Anna gave birth to her first son, Arthur Michael Schultz, in Roswell, New Mexico. Anna would call her newborn son Michael after his father, Michael Schultz. At this point, Anna Lou Welty began going by a new name, Ann Schultz. But this name change appears to be informal, not legal, since she and Michael Schultz never actually married. But Ann would not be without a husband for long, because a year later, on January 21st, 1962, 18-year-old Ann Schultz would marry 28-year-old James Goodyear. James Edgar Goodyear was born on December 7th, 1933, to his parents John and Maybelle in Modena, Pennsylvania. James had 1 brother and 2 sisters, and on July 21st, 1952, he joined the Air Force. He was 19 years old. and he would serve in the military for nearly 20 years. In 1962, when he and Anne were married, it's likely that James was stationed at a U.S. Air Force base near Roswell, New Mexico. Somehow he met Anne, who was working as a nurse at the Eastern New Mexico Medical Center. And after their marriage, Anne and James changed Anne's 1-year-old son's name from Arthur Michael Schultz to Michael Arthur Goodyear. Little Mike took his new stepfather's last name. And oddly enough, on Anne and James's marriage certificate, Anne would write down false information. First, she signed her name as Anne Schultz, when her legal name was Anna Llewellyn. Then, she also wrote that she was from Newburgh, England, not Quanah, Texas. And Anne also changed her birth year, not to make herself younger like you might expect, but to make herself older. Anne wrote down on her marriage certificate that she was born in 1938. That would have made her 24 years old at the time of her marriage to James, when she was really 18. When newlyweds Anne and James visited her family, the family was surprised about the fact that Anne was lying about her age. Her Aunt Willie remembered that Anne became very angry when they approached her about this age discrepancy. Willie also recalled that Anne claimed to be working as an airline stewardess. But according to Willie, Anne was likely lying. She'd probably never been an airline stewardess. And after Anne married James, she changed her name yet again. That's of course pretty expected. She'd be Anne Goodyear now, right? Wrong. Anne Schultz became Judi Goodyear. She went primarily by Judi, spelled either Judy or Judi. According to the Pensacola News-Journal, Judi probably picked Judias as her name because her new husband James's Catholic christening name was Judias. Okay, you might be tempted to think that Judi was a big jokester, that she was just putting down weird details on her marriage certificate because, hey, why not? It's an easy laugh to say your age is wrong or that you're from the wrong location. And as far as the airline stewardess bit, who doesn't stretch the truth to their family from time to time, right? And, look, you can change your name to whatever you want. It's a free country. But you're going to start to notice a pattern here. And that pattern is that Anna Welty or Anne Schultz or Judi Goodyear was a pathological liar. For example, as an adult, Judi would swear up and down to everyone who would listen that she was a full-blooded Native American from the Apache tribe. She claimed that she was a direct descendant of Geronimo, but Judi's birth certificate only lists her race as American. And when the Pensacola News-Journal reporters checked, none of the indigenous people they asked recognized Welty as a Native American name. Judi lied so much and so often that it's a part of why it's challenging to verify her personal information. It's a little weird to think that to this day, Judi's lies have an impact. They were just that pervasive. Right after Judi and James were married in January of 1962, the newlyweds and 1-year-old Mike moved across the country for James's job. He was a technical sergeant and had been stationed at the McCoy Air Force Base. So the little family of 3 went from Roswell, New Mexico to Orlando, Florida, and they were met with a warm welcome. The local newspapers reported that, to welcome the young Goodyear family to the base, the Air Force wives held a public coffee event. Judi became pretty involved in the Air Force Base, too. In July of 1964, she was the co-chairman for the family services at the McCoy Air Force Base. She even helped throw coffee parties to welcome incoming military families, just like they had for her family when they first arrived. Judi also began running the Conway Acres Child Care Center. On January 16, 1966, Judi and James had their first son together. His name was James Allen Goodyear. The very next year, on March 9, 1967, they had a little girl. Her name was Kimberly Ann Goodyear. In 1970, James was deployed to South Vietnam to serve in the Vietnam War, and 1 year later, he returned to his wife and 3 children in Florida. When James first came home from his tour of duty, he seemed fit as a fiddle. It was probably a miracle, considering how many U.S. soldiers who went to Vietnam weren't coming back at all. But shortly after arriving in Orlando, James became sick. And then he kept getting sicker and sicker. Over the course of 2 weeks, James experienced increasingly worse nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Around that same time, in the fall of 1971, James and Judi took in a foster child. Her name was Deborah Sims. According to court documents, Deborah recalled that there was no apparent explanation for James's illness, but it was quite obviously very serious. Besides the vomiting, nausea, and diarrhea, James was experiencing vivid hallucinations. Once, Deborah witnessed James seeing a rabbit on his bed, and she remembered that James would also pick at his bed linens. In Deborah's court testimony, she explained that Judi was hesitant to take James to the hospital. After all, James was 37 years old. Surely, Judi must have thought this will pass. But it didn't, and on September 13, 1971, James was hospitalized at the United States Naval Hospital in Orlando. 3 days later, on September 16th, James Edgar Goodyear died. At the time, James was under the care of Dr. R.C. Achenbach, and Dr. Achenbach was baffled at James's death. He could find no explanation for the sickness, the symptoms, nothing. He had tried to stabilize James's condition, but he had failed. Dr. Achenbach dubbed James's cause of death cardiovascular collapse and renal failure. Other reports from the Pensacola News-Journal explained that James also had bilateral pneumonia with effusion and hypoxia, and that only 24 hours before he had died, James had suffered from respiratory arrest. Basically, his body had failed him, and no one knew why. The Goodyears mourned for James. He was a great father and a devoted military man. In his obituary, it stated that James was survived by his beloved wife, Judi A. Goodyear, sons Michael Arthur and James Allen Goodyear, and daughter, Miss Kimberly Ann Goodyear. His funeral service was held on Monday, September 20th, 1971, at the Fairchild Chapel. He was buried in the Chapel Hill Cemetery in Orlando. Now, Judi Goodyear was a single mother of 3 children. But she did what mothers do. She made it work. And it didn't hurt that she was the beneficiary of several James's life insurance policies and veterans benefits. That's what these policies are there for, right? To help people when it seems like their world is falling apart. All in all, Judi received about $33,000 in insurance policy money following James's death. Today, that would be about $248,000. She also received dependency compensation from the Veterans Administration. That equaled about $62,000, which is about $467,000 in today's money. But tragedy struck the Goodyear household again on January 21st, 1972, about a year after James's death. An unknown person poured kerosene throughout Judi's family home and lit it on fire. The house was destroyed, and the local authorities ruled the fire as arson. Initially, someone was charged for starting the fire, but those charges were dropped due to a lack of evidence. Following the fire, Judi collected about $96,000 in home insurance money. That's about $702,000 today. Then Judi and her 3 children moved from Orlando to a very nice home in the Pensacola, Florida area. This wouldn't be the only house fire that Judi's family would experience. It was really weird, like house fires and Judi somehow went hand in hand. On July 17, 1976, Judi's home would catch fire again. This time, the fire was not determined to be arson. Officials stated that it started in a closet containing clothes and paper. And again, on April 1st of 1977, the Pensacola News-Journal reported that Judi's house had caught fire. Apparently, the fire started at 3:46 a.m., and was due to defective wiring connected into the air conditioning unit. By the time Judi and her 3 children noticed the fire, it had overwhelmed their stairwell. 33-year-old Judi, 16-year-old Mike, 11-year-old James Jr., and 10-year-old Kimberly were forced to jump from their second-floor windows to escape the raging flames. In a stroke of great luck, all 4 of them made the 18-foot leap without any injuries, despite there being no plants or bushes to break their fall. Now, we don't know how much insurance money Judi received from these house fires, but I'd bet my own house that she received a good amount. In the mid-1970s, amidst her many house fires, Judi also began dating a new man. This was Bobby Joe Morris. Bobby was born on December 14, 1941, to parents Austin and Lodell. Bobby was from Brewton, Alabama. But in his adult years, he made his way about 60 miles south to Pensacola, Florida. There, he met Judi and they began dating. Around this time, Judi was still working in the medical field, like she had been in New Mexico when she met James. From 1975 to 76, Judi worked at the University Hospital in Pensacola, and from 76 to 77, she worked at the Escambia County Nursing Home, which was also located in Pensacola. If you're wondering how Judi had nabbed at least 3 positions in the medical field without any actual education in medicine, you're asking the right questions. Based on the available records, it's unclear if Judi even graduated from high school. During courtroom testimony, it was revealed that Judi often lied about her training and experience on job applications. Sometimes she told people that she had 1 doctorate in nursing and another one in anatomy. Other times, she told people that her 2 doctorates were in biological research and psychology. She also told her friends and family that she was earning her MD. But that was a lie. It was all lies. From what we know of Judi's previous experience about lying on official forms, her penchant for lying about her education tracks. Plus, what were people in the 1970s going to do? Google her? And even if they could, what name would they have searched? Anna Lou Welty? Judi Goodyear? And now that Judi was in a relationship with Bobby Morris, she had changed her name yet again, this time to Judi Morris. Eventually, Judi and Bobby became common-law married, so this name change makes more sense than some of her others. In 1977, Bobby was offered an exciting new job. He was going to be a utilities director in Trinidad, Colorado. As a result of this job, Bobby and Judi and the kids moved to Colorado. As we discussed, Judi's house had recently burned down in April of '77. How serendipitous this had all worked out. So Bobby, Judi, and her children lived in Trinidad for a couple of years. While there, Judi would earn her only verifiable degree, a licensed practical nursing degree from the Trinidad State Junior College. When Judi and Bobby first moved to Colorado together, Judi began taking out death and life insurance policies in Bobby's name. For at least one of these policies, Bobby did not sign the paperwork, but Judi probably did. According to court testimony, Judi claimed that Bobby was far too busy to sign the policy in person himself. Then, Judi took the policy under the guise of delivering it to Bobby. But according to Bobby's own mother, Judi just signed the policy herself and returned it to the insurance company. However, it was proven in court that Bobby did know about some of these policies. His own mother said he spoke to her about it. Judi had taken out one life insurance policy for Bobby that was worth $30,000. That's about $150,000 today. And Bobby told his mother that he wished like hell that Judi had not done that. On January 28, 1978, 36-year-old Bobby Joe Morris died at the San Rafael Hospital in Trinidad, Colorado. His cause of death was said to be cardiac arrest, a heart attack. He was buried in the Green Acres Memorial Park of Brewton, Alabama. Judi pushed really hard for Bobby to be cremated, but Bobby's mother, Lodell, wasn't having it. She made sure her son was buried right where he should be in his hometown. When Lodell passed in 2004, she was buried next to her son. Following Bobby's death, Judi received approximately $23,000 in insurance money. That's about $173,000 in today's money. She used some or all of it to buy a house. By this point, Judi was so unexplainably rich that her friends started to notice. They could just tell she had such nice things. According to Debbie Sims's court testimony, Judi and James's foster child, Judi had always aspired to the high life. Debbie remembered that Judi would spend hours sewing sequins on her evening gowns, even when she had nowhere to wear them. 1 year after Bobby's death, it was around June of '79, this is when Judi's first son, 18-year-old Mike, joined the Army. And for all intents and purposes, that appeared to be going pretty well. Mike had been stationed at Fort Leonard Wood in Montana during October of '79. He had had some exposure to chlorine gas, but nothing too serious. And on October 26th of 1979, Mike returned to his mother's home while on leave. He was just stopping by for a few days. His next assignment was in Georgia. But this was when things started to go downhill. After one day at Judi's house, Mike became sick. He experienced vomiting, diarrhea, and extreme dizziness. Soon after, Mike battled a horrific rash and began to go numb in his fingers and toes. And as you recall from the beginning of this episode, Mike was paralyzed in his lower extremities by that December. He was discharged from the Army as a private and sent to the Walter Reed Hospital for further treatment. Mike and Judi always had a different mother-son relationship. In court, it would be explained that Mike had some learning disabilities. It's likely they affected his speech and behavior. Because of that, Judi frequently shipped Mike off to different medical facilities and institutions. He had been a patient at the Florida State Hospital for the mentally ill. He had gone to a school in Hialeah, Florida for the emotionally disturbed. And he had been enrolled in a camp for troubled youths in Santa Rosa County. According to court testimony, Mike spent most of his childhood from ages 8 to 16 in special homes for the, quote, mentally disturbed. He only really saw Judi, James Jr., and Kimberly around Christmas time. And even then, Judi's friend testified in court that Judi hid Mike away when guests were over. This friend, Constance Lang, explained that, quote, there was almost no interaction between Mike and Judi. She was really good with Kim and James Jr., but not with Mike. Deborah Sims, the young woman who had lived with Judi back when James was alive, testified that Judi did not purchase toys for Mike when he was a child, and that Judi often sewed clothing for James Jr. and Kimberly, but not Mike. And when 17-year-old Mike lived with Judi and Bobby in Trinidad, relatives reported that Michael was made to sleep in the basement. Meanwhile, his little brother James Jr. and sister Kimberly shared a bedroom together. According to Bobby's mother's testimony, Judi once said in reference to Mike, "No one little bastard is going to ruin the lives of 4 others." Perhaps Judi resented Mike because he was born out of wedlock. Perhaps she struggled with her own prejudices as a parent of a child with special needs. Judi would deny all of this, of course. She claimed she loved Michael dearly, that this wasn't her shipping Mike off, but getting him the help he needed. But it seemed like everyone noticed that Judi treated Mike very poorly. Even Mike's childhood friends saw it. Air Force Sergeant Kenneth Barnes, who had lived on the same street as Mike growing up, testified that she called him stupid, she called him an idiot, she called him dumb. According to Kenneth, Mike loved his mother. Kenneth said Mike tried. Mike's heart was in it, but from what I seen, the feedback from her was not there. On May 13, 1980, 19-year-old Mike was supposed to be continuing his recovery at the Jay Hospital in Jay, Florida. But to celebrate Mike's health, Judi wanted to take a canoeing trip with her kids. She retrieved Mike from the Jay Hospital, which was about an hour north from the Pensacola Gulf Breeze area, and she let 2 youngest kids, 14-year-old James Jr. and 13-year-old Kimberly, skip school that Tuesday. And now the family of 4 headed to the East River for a quick canoe trip. They set up a lawn chair in the middle of their canoe and strapped Mike in with a ski belt. And then Mike, James Jr., and Judi went off on their canoe adventure. Kim, for unknown reasons, except that she might not have fit into the canoe, remained at the boat landing. When Judi and James Jr. returned around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Mike was not with them. He had drowned. Everyone was shocked. How could this have happened? Judi explained to many that Michael's fishing line had gotten caught in a tree. That made the tree limb break loose and land in the canoe. Then there was the snake on the tree branch. At this point, everyone was freaking out. Judi and James Jr. moved to one side of the canoe and it overturned. James Jr. was knocked unconscious, and Mike became submerged in the water. Judi was able to save James Jr., but not Mike. She couldn't. James Jr.'s unconscious body was already so much for Judi to swim to the shoreline. There simply wasn't time to save Mike. A passing fisherman found Judi and James Jr. standing in the water with their upside-down canoe and a floating ice chest. Judi explained the tree branch and snake story to the fisherman, and he asked Judi if they should look for Mike, who was still underwater, but Judi said no. She wanted to go back to the boat landing where Kimberly was waiting. Judi expressed an interest in getting medical attention for James Jr., but she didn't say hardly anything at all about Mike. Before she called the authorities, she took the time to sit down and pop open a beer. When the authorities arrived, Judi didn't tell the same tree branch and snake version of events. Now she said she had hit a tree stump that had been hidden under the waterline. Later, Judi would clarify that all of it was true. The tree branch fell, the snake was there, and they had hit a submerged tree stump. Judi also told the sheriff's deputies that Mike was wearing a life jacket, but when Mike's body was found at 7 p.m. the next day, he wasn't wearing a life vest, only his regular clothes and 12 pounds of leg braces, which had somehow been locked in an upright position. Afterward, James Jr. went to the West Florida hospital for treatment. According to court documents, when the hospital workers asked James Jr. if he had fallen unconscious during the whole debacle, he said no, he hadn't been unconscious at any point, contrary to Judi's version of events. The doctors determined that James Jr. was fine, and he was released from the hospital shortly after. Judi received a huge amount of insurance from Mike's death. She bought a boat, a Corvette, brand new furniture, and paid for extremely lavish trips for her family. She also purchased certificates of deposits, or CDs, for James Jr. and Kimberly, and she loaned huge amounts of cash to her friends. Meanwhile, Michael Arthur Goodyear was buried in the Barrancas National Cemetery in Pensacola. He was remembered as a kind young man and a military veteran. When the Pensacola News-Journal reported Michael's death, Judi told them that she was a clinical physician at an alcoholic rehabilitation center in Florida. It was known as the Okaloosa Guidance Clinic and was located in Fort Walton Beach. But Judi, we already know, was an incredibly unreliable resource. She probably wasn't a physician, though she did work at this clinic. Or if Judi was a physician there, it was because she had lied about her education and been given a job she was not qualified for. Regardless, the newspaper published her name as Dr. Judi, but not Dr. Judi Goodyear. Now she was going by Dr. Judi Beunoano. It's suspected that Judi chose this new last name, Buenoano, because it's a loose Spanish translation of Goodyear. And when I say loose, I mean so loose it's nearly incorrect. I don't speak Spanish, so I'm not going to try to explain how Buenoano, spelled Buenoano with no tilde or accent mark, is not the same thing as Goodyear. But if you do speak Spanish, feel free to explain the linguistics of this to us in the Facebook group. The question is, if you were to say Goodyear in Spanish, what would it be? A relative of Judi said Judi changed her name to Buenoano because she thought it was a, quote, Indian name. And according to Judi's conversation with this relative, Judi felt that since she was working with, quote, Indians in an alcoholic rehabilitation center, she wanted to fit in, and she didn't want them to be able to find her in her own home. Just to be clear, Judi was white, not Hispanic, and certainly not Native American or indigenous. Though, like I mentioned earlier in this episode, she would make false claims that she was of the Apache tribe. And to further prove that Judi just had no idea what was Spanish, what was English, or what was an actual last name for an indigenous person would be, Judi misspelled Buenoano when she first changed her name. She spelled it Buneano. Later, she would fix the spelling a little bit, and it would become the Buenoano she is reported today. But like I said, with no tilde over the N. Judi had also changed her children's last names from Goodyear to Goodyear Buenoano. On Mike's gravestone, it even says Michael Buenoano Goodyear. I'm not sure why the order is switched, though. Or where Arthur, Michael's middle name, went. Throughout the bulk of James Jr. and Kimberly's lives, they would be referred to in the newspaper by both Goodyear and Buenoano, interchangeably. Sometime around 1981, Judi started dating a new guy named John Wesley Gentry II. John was born on June 16th to parents Hubert and Lucille in Pensacola. John was part of a very big, very family-oriented family. He was named after his grandfather, who was also from Pensacola, and he was one of 6 kids, having 1 sister and 5 brothers. On September 3rd, 1964, 18-year-old John had joined the military, just like his own father. He would serve in the Marine Corps. John completed at least one tour of duty in Vietnam. While there, he stepped on a landmine and survived. For his bravery, John received a Purple Heart. When Judi and John met, he was the co-operator of the wallpaper mill outlet at the local town and country plaza. And at first, Judi told John that she was the supervising nurse at the West Florida hospital. We don't know if that's true, but around the same time that Judi met John, she also started a new job. She was now the owner of a salon called Fingers and Faces. Maybe she used some of her insurance money to buy the place. The Pensacola News-Journal did a dedicated piece on Fingers and Faces, which is how we know that Judi had 8 employees, and that the salon was fairly successful. It was reported that they averaged 3,000 customers a month. But who knows what was true and what was more of Judi's lies. After all, Judi told her salon employees that she was a scientific pathologist for local military hospitals. She made it seem like she was just running a salon for fun on the side. In no time at all, John and Judi were living together. Then they were engaged to be married. John had been married once before in 1969 to a woman named Norma Gale and her adopted son from a previous marriage. When John asked Judi about her past relationships and the lineage of her children, Judi did what Judi did. She lied. She said her first husband, James Goodyear, had died in a plane crash in Vietnam. And she claimed her second husband, Bobby, had died of alcoholism. It's likely she told John that Mike died by accidental drowning. But she had told other relatives that Mike died in a chemical warfare incident. In November of 1982, John came down with a bad cold. So Judi, ever the loving wife, started giving John a daily vitamin pill. But oddly enough, the pill didn't seem to be helping John. But he still took them. Night after night, John would get into bed. Judi would reach into her nightstand, and John would swallow the pill that Judi handed him. After a while, John began experiencing horrible cramping, nausea, and vomiting. He checked into a hospital on December 15th of 1982. And wouldn't you know it, after a few days he was fine. They weren't sure what caused John's illness. The hospital indicated that John's high blood pressure might have had something to do with it. When John came back from the hospital, Judi continued giving him his daily vitamin pill, and John's sickness returned. Also, John noticed that Judi had grown distant. In his court testimony, he stated that they, quote, didn't argue or anything like that. We were just not the lovey-dovey couple we were before. While this was happening, Judi's employees at Fingers and Faces asked about John. Why was he in the hospital? Was he okay? Would he get better? Judi told them that John had cancer, and she wasn't optimistic that John would make it. But as we know, John did not have cancer. Perhaps he had stopped taking Judi's vitamin pills, because by the summer of 1982, he had made a full recovery. John and Judi were set to be married in late June of 1983. And on June 25th, only a few days before the wedding, Judi was hosting a going-away party for a friend. Judi had organized the whole thing. She invited John, the departing friend, and several others to eat dinner at the Driftwood restaurant near Halifax Place in Pensacola. Afterward, Judi and her girlfriends were going to hit the town and have a girls' night out. It was going to be a fun-filled day. And according to John Gentry himself, that morning, he had received some amazing news. Judi had told him that she was pregnant. He told the Pensacola News-Journal, I was ecstatic. I had always hoped for something like this. This would have been John's first child. Since Judi and John would be getting home at different times after this dinner party, they had driven to the restaurant in separate cars. Judi parked her car in a nearby hotel parking lot. But she didn't tell John that. In fact, she gave John strict instructions not to park in that specific hotel lot. That evening, after dinner was over, John got into his vehicle, he turned the car, and a car bomb exploded. Miraculously, John survived, but the blast was so strong that it took the roof off of his car and he suffered massive injuries. His shoe had been ripped from his foot. John would spend over 2.5 months in a hospital. He had to be treated for severe damage to his stomach, liver, kidneys, and large and small intestines. He underwent extensive surgery, which sounds absolutely hellish, though he did live. As the authorities investigated the car bomb, they realized that the bomb was made of 2 sticks of dynamite in John's trunk. Someone had wired them with an electric blasting cap and connected the contraption to John's left tail light. When he left for the dinner party, it had been light out, so the bomb hadn't detonated. But when John was trying to go home in the dark, the bomb blew up. In case you were wondering, yes, Judi had started taking out life insurance policies in John's name 3 months before he became ill back in November and December of '82, according to court documents. And had John died in the hospital or the car bombing, Judi would have received around $510,000. That's a whopping $3.8 million in today's money. And as the 50% beneficiary on John's will, Judi also would have gained half of his assets. Clearly, she was getting greedy, and in doing so, she made one fatal mistake. Sure, she had left behind a string of dead husbands and one son, and so far, the authorities hadn't really thought much of it. There are a lot of people in this world who die. And especially in the 70s and 80s, it's totally possible that a bunch of those deaths just slipped under the radar. Suspicious circumstances be damned. But car bombs are different. They raise red flags in a way that sick husbands don't. Car bombs mean that federal officers are going to be investigating. And as we all know, federal officers don't mess around. So now the Pensacola Police Department, the State Fire Marshal's Office, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the Federal Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau, and the FBI were looking very closely at John Gentry's car bomb. And these detectives were talking to John's friends and family. They wanted to know who could possibly want to hurt John. And that's when they caught wind of Judi and the so-called vitamin pills that she had been giving John. Turns out they weren't vitamin pills at all. They were paraformaldehyde, which is a Class 3 poison, meaning it's very, very deadly. From here, all the pieces of the puzzle came together for the investigators. And by the end of July 1983, only 1 month after John's car exploded, law enforcement suspected Judi had made 2 attempts on John's life, and they knew she was motivated by a big insurance payout. That same month, July of 1983, John returned home from the Sacred Heart Hospital. At this point, Judi gave John another pill. She told him it was a Valium, but it wasn't. It was still paraformaldehyde. The reporting isn't super clear on this, but I believe that Judi was arrested right after she tried to poison John with this pill. It might have been how the authorities were able to capture her red-handed. But maybe this isn't quite accurate. When John learned that Judi had been arrested, he told the Pensacola News-Journal that they were, quote, as of this moment, still engaged. He also said he was very shocked to learn of her arrest. But maybe John was just saving face if he helped the police arrest his fiance. Regardless, on July 27, 1983, 40-year-old Judi Beunoano was arrested while working at her salon, Fingers and Faces. She was held on a $50,000 bond, and she was charged with attempted first-degree murder. This was solely for trying to poison 37-year-old John. The car bomb investigation was ongoing, but the authorities and everyone else suspected that Judi was involved with that too. Around the same time that Judi was arrested, the officers obtained a federal search warrant for her home. There, the authorities found a lot of illegal things, including a quantity of marijuana, drug paraphernalia, and a sawed-off shotgun in the home. They also found call logs, which they believed contained the calls Judi had made to buy the explosives used in the car bomb. A year later, all of this evidence found in Judi's home was suppressed. A judge ruled that the search warrant contained unproven conclusions, which made it illegal. But now, the authorities were on to Judi. They knew she had tried to kill John multiple times. And from there, it didn't take much for them to figure out that John was not the first man Judi had tried to kill. In fact, John was likely one of the only men to escape Judi's clutches alive. James, Bobby, and Mike had not been so lucky. As soon as Judi's Black Widow insurance fraud scheme was revealed, her fall from grace was quick, and that's because law enforcement officials had Judi's MO down. All they needed to do was find every big death or life insurance payout Judi had ever received, and they could safely assume that she had killed a person in order to get it. On January 11th, when Judi was out on bail for trying to murder John, she was arrested for murdering her own son, 19-year-old Mike Goodyear, as well as grand theft for his life insurance payouts. On January 26, 1984, law enforcement officials exhumed the body of Bobby Joe Morris. Bobby's liver contained a lethal level of arsenic, and they believed the arsenic poison was likely what had caused Bobby's heart attack. Judi was the prime suspect for Bobby's murder. She didn't face any criminal charges yet because they wanted to see how the trials for Mike and John went. But the state of Florida was suing Judi. They wanted her to return the insurance payouts from Bobby's death. By March 6th, John Gentry had filed a civil suit against Judi for the attempted poisoning and car bomb. He wanted more than $5,000 in damages, which seems crazy generous. Judi filed a countersuit against John, demanding more than $15,000 in damages. For what? I'm not sure. At this point, investigators were also looking into James Goodyear's death. They exhumed his body on March 14, 1984, and based on the amount of arsenic found, they determined that he had been poisoned. If you're losing track of what's going on, don't worry. It all gets cleaned up in a second. On Tuesday, March 20th, 1984, Judi's first trial began. This one was for Mike's death and the insurance payouts relating to him. If convicted, Judi could receive one of two sentences. She would either die by the electric chair or receive life in prison without parole for at least 25 years. And, of course, the trial was an incredibly high-profile event, so much so that the judge had to set special rules for the media. He banned all flash photography in the courtroom, created guidelines about when journalists could stand up to leave, and only allowed one TV camera. That single camera broadcasted live coverage of the trial to numerous TV stations. Due to the intense coverage of Judi's case, they had a tricky time finding unbiased jurors. About 1/3 of the jury pool had already decided how they felt about Judi. They had either read about her in the papers or seen her face plastered on the news. Finally, the jurors were selected and, in a rare event, sequestered, and opening statements began. Throughout Judi's trial, she would often look at her 18-year-old son, James Jr., and 17-year-old daughter, Kimberly, across the courtroom. They would communicate in a version of sign language, and Judi often blew them kisses. Outside of these moments, Judi appeared emotionless. During the trial itself, the prosecution explained that Mike was, quote, spurned by his mother and hidden away in institutions until she came up with the final solution. And that solution, according to the prosecution, was to drown Mike in the river and to pretend it was an accident. The prosecutors suggested that Judi's son, James Jr., had helped kill Mike. James Jr. would have been 14 at the time of Mike's death. The state argued that both Judi and James Jr. had simply pushed Mike into the river. Afterward, they had overturned their own canoe and waited for someone to find them. And then they had concocted their outlandish tree, branch, snake, tree stump story to help cover their tracks. Of course, Judi's defense team denied this. Her lawyers claimed that Mike's death was a terrible accident, that this entire trial was meant to torment a loving, grieving mother who had lost her son in a tragedy. Perhaps, they admitted, Judi was guilty of negligence. She should have made Mike, her paraplegic son, wear a life vest. But otherwise, this was just a gross misinterpretation of events. But the placement of Mike's body and belongings did not match Judi's stories about how Mike drowned. And Judi's stories had changed so many times. Multiple witnesses said as much. Sometimes, Judi even said that Mike had been the one paddling the canoe. But how? Mike was paralyzed. He couldn't have done the things Judi said he did. And, according to court documents, Judi had a clear motive. She was experiencing extreme financial hardship right before Mike passed. She had had 24 checks bounce, and her bank account went into the red more than 10 times. She needed cash fast, and so she took out several life insurance policies in Mike's name. A handwriting expert for the state indicated that Judi had even signed the policies herself. Perhaps the most compelling testimony was that of Dr. David P. Nicholson of Sacred Heart Hospital. Dr. Nicholson said that based on Mike's autopsy, his sudden paralysis was part of a nervous system disorder, one that was caused by heavy metal poisoning due to ingesting arsenic and lead. So it's likely that the entire reason Mike became paralyzed was because of Judi. When he came home on leave in October of 1979, She tried to poison him to capitalize on those insurance payouts. And when that failed, Judi was now forced to take care of her disabled son, so she found another way to exterminate him. She enlisted her other son, James Jr., and took Mike on a special canoeing trip, making sure he did not make it back. And as it turns out, Mike didn't even like being on the water. According to his friend's testimony, Mike never would have asked to go canoeing. He was just there to spend time with his family. The trial lasted 10 days. James Jr. and Kimberly both testified in support of their mother, but Judi herself did not testify. And at about 1 a.m. on March 31st, 1984, after deliberating for 4 hours, they found Judi guilty of first-degree murder in the death of her son. She was also found guilty of grand theft. Later, on June 6th of 1984, Judi was sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder. She also received 15 years in prison for the grand theft. At this time, the banks had foreclosed on Judi's Gulf Breeze home and repossessed 3 of her vehicles. Next up was the trial for Judi's attempt on John Gentry's life. By this point, she faced charges for both poisoning John and trying to kill him through the car bomb. Meanwhile, James Jr. had also been arrested for his alleged involvement in the car bomb. He would have been 17 at the time. And now, in 1984, 18-year-old James Jr. had his own separate trial for that. But the only true piece of evidence linking James Jr. to this car bomb was a specific wire that was found in his closet. The wire was not common. It was mostly used in car bombs. But the state could not prove that the wire belonged to James Jr. Apparently, multiple family members used this closet, not just James Jr., so he was acquitted. On October 15, 1984, Judi's trial for attempting to murder John Gentry began. The story arc for the state prosecution was very similar to Judi's trial for killing Mike. Judi needed money, she took out life insurance policies on John, and then she tried to kill him. To help illustrate that Judi knew an influx of cash was coming, Susan Williams, an employee of Judi's Fingers and Faces, testified. Susan said that Judi was planning on taking a world cruise, one that would cost $20,000 per person. That's about $60,000 in today's money. And Judi was going to take herself and her 2 surviving kids, but not John. Susan also believed that Judi had faked a fainting spell upon learning of John's car bomb. Judi's defense didn't really have a leg to stand on. She was convicted of this crime in October 1984, and on November 6, 1984, Judi was sentenced to 12 years in prison for attempted second-degree murder in the case of John Gentry. A year later, in October of 1985, Judi began her 3rd jury trial, this one for murdering her first husband, James Edgar Goodyear, in 1971. The state brought in 3 medical experts who testified that James had died of arsenic poisoning. And 2 of Judi's previous friends, Constance Lang and Mary Beverly Owen, testified that Judi was very unhappy with her marriage. Judi had even spoken to them on different occasions about killing someone with arsenic by poisoning their food. According to Constance Lang, Judi never even considered divorcing James. She only wanted to use poison to solve her marital problems. That way, she could receive insurance money and VA benefits. At this trial for James Sr., evidence was also presented about Bobby Joe Morris. The state demonstrated that Bobby had died in a very similar manner as James, and that Bobby had also experienced the same symptoms as someone poisoned with arsenic, vomiting, nausea, and diarrhea. The state was trying to show that Judi had a history with arsenic, and apparently they did so successfully, because Judi was convicted for the first-degree murder of James Edgar Goodyear. And on November 26, 1985, she was sentenced to death. Although Judi would never stand trial for Bobby's death, it's widely understood that she killed him. But since Judi was already sentenced to death, the authorities didn't bother with pursuing Bobby's murder in court. Judi appealed her case, and on June 23, 1988, the Supreme Court of Florida denied her, and her execution was scheduled for March 30, 1998. In the days before Judi's execution, the Orlando Sentinel reported that John Gentry, Judi's only surviving victim, said, quote, "There are people so evil that they really don't need to be among civilized people. She preyed upon people that loved her. John also told Fox News, if they would allow me, I would pull the switch myself. After surviving Judi Beunoano, John Gentry went on to remarry and have 2 children of his own. The day before her execution, Judi appealed for a stay of execution. Although she had never spoken to reporters, even turning down 20/20 and 60 Minutes, she did make an appearance on NBC for this final appeal. I can't find the contents of that interview, but it must have gone poorly. Judi's living children, James Jr. and Kimberly, spoke out against their mother's execution. They asked that their mother be spared. Kim called it a hate crime against God and humanity, but the stay of execution was denied. And so on March 30th of 1998, Judi woke up at about 1 a.m. She ate her final meal at 4:30 a.m. It consisted of steamed broccoli, steamed asparagus with lemon, tomato and black pepper, fresh strawberries, and hot tea. Then Judi showered and dressed. At 7:01 a.m., 54-year-old Judi W. Beunoano died by the electric chair at the Florida State Prison in Stark, Florida. At the time of her death, Judi still claimed that she did not kill Mike. Maybe admitting to murdering her own son was too much for her. Husbands seemed to come and go for Judi, but perhaps Mike's murder was the only one she felt guilty for. And why did she change her name so many times? Was it an attempt to evade authorities? But she changed her name before the murders. So was it a self-esteem problem? By most accounts, she had a terrible childhood. Maybe she already hated herself and was trying on new identities. One thing we can be sure of, Judi was a pathological liar about many things. But let's get to the why of the Judi Beunoano murders. I think it's obvious that it's the second oldest reason for killing: money. Most of the female poisoners I've covered seem to have a compulsion to poison, like Blanche Taylor Moore or Katie Strickland. They became addicted to the act like most serial killers. But Judi was clearly addicted to money. She had learned early on in the 70s that doctors and medical examiners often miss poison, quickly making it her weapon of choice. It's difficult to compare the motives of killers sometimes. But somehow, those that have a compulsion to kill their relatives seem like they have to be mentally ill. They're addicted to the secrecy of watching the suffering of their victims. It's not always about financial gain. But Judi Beunoano did it for the money, her husband's, and her own flesh and blood. And that feels more cold and calculating. And yet there is no doubt that despite differing motives, these women killers enjoyed causing pain. All of these women were addicted to the power they felt over a loved one's life, which, regardless of the weapon and regardless of the victim, is still the definition of a serial killer. Southern Fried True Crime is hosted and produced by me, Erica Kelley. Today's episode was researched and written by Andrea Marshbank, with additional writing by me. As usual, all editorial comments are my own. Southern Fried's original music is by Rob Harrison of Gamma Radio, and the original graphic art is by Coley Horner. Today's episode was edited and mixed by Brandon Scheck-Snyder of Southern Gothic and Erica Kelley. If you have any case suggestions, please go to my website and click on the Listener Suggestion tab. This is the best way for me to get those little-known cases y'all always send me. Please remember that I don't accept suggestions on social media private messaging. But please come join our Facebook group, Southern Fried True Crime Fans Discussion Group, where we swap recipes, worship Dolly Parton, and share memes. We do, of course, discuss true crime, not just Southern Fried, but all kinds. But it is still very much a Southern lifestyle group. Our group is a safe and fun corner of Facebook, and by God, we mean it when we say no shit asses allowed. It's not just a motto, it's how we run the group. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe and please tell a friend or rate and review. I'm also on all large platforms like iTunes, iHeart, Spotify, Amazon, and Audible. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Y'all take care.